A very strange and paradoxical phenomenon on me. Sometimes when you compete in a certain thing and you have developed and perfected in it for a certain period of time, you acquire mastery and great skills, but a vulnerability and blind spot is born, which is not naturally generated, but still is a natural consequence of this process, namely to lose a certain competition from someone significantly weaker and inexperienced than you, not because he is strong, but simply because you have adapted so much to a certain type of behavior and actions that you intuitively react to it. However, this opposite recruit who is your opponent does not follow the rhythm, the rules, and the natural consequential steps and laws of the competition, not because he doesn't want to, but because he simply doesn't even know anything at all in this competition. Consequently, if you start to treat and process him in a way in which you do it with other masters, then a dissonance will occur which will stun you for a little and will confuse you for a moment. And during that time, the inexperienced opponent will take advantage of it and will strike an attack. And the probability to lose increases drastically. And sometimes a very experienced master loses from a recruit, not because the recruit has real skills, but because the master is too accustomed to face predominantly more experienced or at his level opponents in whatever relations, undertakings, and contexts. This rule, or rather natural error in the process, appears everywhere where there is exponential development which is faced with unpredictable and unforeseeable behavior which has been outside the zone of comfort and familiarity. A very strange phenomenon, if I can express it that way. Everyone knows about the other phenomenon when you underestimate someone to lose, but now I'm talking and writing not about underestimation, but about overestimation. Overestimating your opponent in a sufficiently large margin leads to loss as well, or if not quite to loss, at least to serious damages, and not from lack of competence on your side, but from incorrect evaluation of the possibilities of your opponent. However, this time, not because you underestimated him, but because you overestimated him. And you were misled by your own habits, built from repetitive practice in an isolated and specific environment which predominantly goes upwards, however forgets to look downwards, because either doesn't want, or can't, or both. To overestimate someone can be just as fatal as to underestimate someone, just in a different way and reason, but they lead to similar and alike results. I have noticed that most people become victims of the fact that they have underestimated someone. However, I'm sure that there are also sufficiently many, although not so much in comparison with underestimation, cases in which overestimation has led to failure in one form or another. Very interesting. If you don't underestimate anyone, then it's as if you overestimate them all equally, but some will actually be an error in the equation. And you will overestimate them in your attempt to prevent the fact to be surprised by the fact that you underestimated them. And thus, sometimes you can create yourself and enter into a trap and grave, which you yourself have constructed and dug, metaphorically speaking. And that just because you don't want to be surprised, because during a fight, surprise can mean doom or serious defeat. However, it seems that if it is inevitable to fall into one of the extremes, then probably you should do the following. Don't have fixed expectations for the competence of your opponent. Even overestimation turns into underestimation when it brings the same effect which underestimation brings. In both relations, reality has not responded and answered to your expectations in one form or another, and way, however ultimately leads to similar ending, which is unfavorable for you always, which at least is certain that it is so, if nothing else. Instead of having fixed expectations for your opponent, have for yourself so there is not so great probability to err as the opposite alternative. But still, in every choice, there is risk, little or much, which may or may not manifest, depending on the context of the circumstances. Expect him to always be capable to act, but never expect how exactly he will act. Even inaction at a certain moment is action if it is presented and applied when the opposite side expected active impact and action. Be ready for improvisation, even if it costs you dignity, but don't rush to do it for its own sake, but only if it is necessary. Expect the probability to lose even while winning, and simultaneously while losing, expect the probability to win. There is no permanent condition. It is variable relative to many factors. Be aware always of your current state and condition, what they are at the moment, and not what they were once. Rely predominantly on your wisdom, experience, sense, instinct, and intuition, instead of on external factors like allied help or favorable conditions of the circumstances. When you put your own skills as foundation and base, then it is more sustainable for yourself instead of whatever external factors. When you suffer defeat from underestimation or overestimation of your opponent or opponents, no matter how many they are, never listen to your ego at that moment, because it will refuse to accept what is happening and will fall into dissonance and denial while the battle is still in full swing. Literally, remove it exactly then, and at least temporarily, and accept your position, even if humiliating and unfavorable, as well as unfair by your ego and standards, as well as perceptions, because they will block your rational thinking and will weaken you and make you even more vulnerable during the battle. Adapt as much and to the extent you can. And if victory and the probability for it become lower and lower, then seek a way to withdraw strategically if that is possible. If retreat is not an option due to one or another reason, then either accept the defeat and surrender consciously, or fight to the end and take along to hell with you as many enemies as possible. And eventually accept that this is the final end of your path, even if unfair, as well as subjectively so and objectively. The last step, which remains after that, is to have foreseen all this before it happened, and to prepare non-standardly and uniquely so as to make, at least to some extent and partially, the circumstances in your favor to the extent possible. Lose the battle before you have lost it, in order to win the battle when you become the winner.